Hello and welcome to the Capital Games Movie Club. I am the Wiz. As you may have figured out if you listened to last week's episode, Zero is on a cinematic sabbatical. But while that's going on, I thought I'd step in and start reviewing movies that I've been waiting to see for a while. And I'm going to start today with a relatively easy and popular one that I think many of you have probably already seen or have been interested in seeing. And that's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But before I get to that, I thought that I would talk about, my thoughts on the MCU as a whole. The MCU, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, are, for the most part, all solid films. I can only think of probably one bad film in the MCU, and that's Thor: The Dark World, which I think everybody can agree with. That was not such a good film, really. But for the most part, these are, again, solid films. For the most part, if I were to rate them out of 5, most of them are like 3s, with the exception of maybe a few that are, maybe one that is a 4-star and a couple that are 3.5. But the rest are like good 3-star films, some 2.5-star films, a sprinkling of a 2-star, and then you have the 1-star, which is Thor: The Dark World, which is a bad movie. But to go into what I think are the best of the MCU films, I have the list on my Letterboxd. By the way, if you are on Letterboxd, you can follow me at Capital Games Wiz. So you can check out all my lists and all the movies I've seen and reviewed, and you can probably know where I'm coming from if you're interested. Again, that's at Letterboxd at Capital Games Wiz. Now, I'm going to have the picture of the ranking of the MCU movies on the screen right now, so you guys can look at it on screen. And basically, my top 5 are The Avengers, I think is number 1. Endgame is number 2. Spider-Man No Way Home is number 3. Black Panther is number 4. And I honestly feel Captain America: The First Avenger is number 5. So you get a feel of maybe what my tastes are when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and what films do I consider to be very good films in there. Those are my top 5 from there. From phases 1 through 3, they were really good. They held my attention pretty well. They were all, again, solid films. The Avengers films, for the most part, especially the first one, were very good. Age of Ultron could have been a lot better, but it was still solid. But the Avengers, I think, is the tops when it comes to the entire MCU cinematic universe. They just married the Avengers premise so well in that movie, and pretty much springboarded the way the rest of the MCU would become, that it was not hard for me to pick one that was the best out of them, and that's clearly the Avengers. I know some of you will probably see Endgame, others might say Black Panther, and that's fine. I can definitely see why. But for me, the Avengers encapsulated, especially for someone who used to be a comic fan, encapsulated what was special about the Avengers when it happened. So I definitely enjoyed the Avengers the most of the MCU films. Now, if I were to go all the way down to the bottom, again, the worst film of the MCU in my mind is Thor: The Dark World. I think that was a trash fire. So I thought that was a bad movie. Next, it may be controversial to a lot of you. Guardians of the Galaxy is the second worst. I never understood why so many people love this movie. I thought it was boring, and I thought Star-Lord was kind of stupid and not really that likable. I think he was redeemed in, I would say, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, another controversial statement. I know, I understand. So that, I would say, is... I guess that's a bad movie too, I would say. And then the next movie, the third worst, is The Eternals. I will say I like the direction of Chloe Zhao in this movie. It has a very visually appealing look, but they threw too much into the movie to then have such little of a payoff. And then the end was just kind of to me. I just didn't really enjoy it that much. It's very flawed to me. It's not bad, but it's got some serious flaws that if they do an Eternals 2, and I hope they do, if they do an Eternals 2, that I hope they decide to actually build upon that and make it a lot better next time. And hopefully Chloe Zhao's back in that too. The fourth worst is Iron Man 2. Iron Man 2 was a big step down from the first Iron Man. And it kind of came back in 3, but 2 had a bunch of problems in it. They didn't show the villain that much, and Whiplash was an interesting villain, so that was very disappointing in that. And the other thing is just the ending was just not satisfying at all. So that was my other problem with Iron Man 2. And a lot of exposition and everything that just made the movie a slog to watch. My number 5 worst film on the MCU is actually Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel had a bunch of problems to it, and the main problem was the writing. The movie did not know what it was going to be or what Captain Marvel was going to be. I mean, is she super serious? Is she a goofball? Is this a road movie? Is this a space opera? Is this a redemption movie? Is this a female empowerment movie? They tried to throw everything into this movie, and it just made the film feel incredibly lopsided. There are decent things in the movie, and I don't think it's a bad movie, really. I think it's average at most. And Brie Larson was good. Brie Larson's a good actress, and she can definitely play a role like that very good. She was just hamstrung by what I feel is the screenplay and the direction of the movie. I think she was entirely hamstrung. So that would be my number 5 worst, Captain Marvel. So now that we know what my taste and what my feelings are on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, why don't we get started with the actual review of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I'll start with a non-spoiler review as usual, so here we go. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness takes what I think are the strong suits of the Eternals, which is to get a visually distinctive and a very visually distinctive director who definitely has his own way of making a movie, and give that director some freedom to do something creative with the source material and make it as entertaining and as different as possible. And while it didn't work very well in Chloe Zhao's movie in The Eternals, it worked very well, I believe, in the Multiverse of Madness. The first thing I do have to talk about, and I'll just get right on, is the direction of Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi, when the movie starts picking up, I would say in like the end of the first act and the beginning of the second act, he really likes to use camera flourishes and do all sorts of different things in the movie that gives this a very distinctive feel that is very entertaining and very nice to watch when you're watching the film, especially when we get to certain parts of the movie. In spoilers, I'll get into more detail with that. And the decisions that he made in the movie visually, again, made it a very interesting movie to watch, even when it slowed down at certain points. I would say when the movie started, it started okay, and it gradually built up, but I think the end of the first and the whole second act is its strongest suit, when you get to see what happens with America Chavez and with Doctor Strange going through the multiverse, which definitely I definitely was having a lot of fun and really enjoying the movie from there at that point. This movie has the same weaknesses that most of the MCU movies have, and that's basically towards the end of the second act and into the third, it slows down. And it doesn't slow down to, I would say, where you get bored, but it does tend to slog a little bit in its exposition, where some things could have been cut. Well, yeah, I think some things might have been okay to cut, especially if you are familiar with the villain of the movie, and I'll get to that shortly. Let's actually, you know what? Let's get into performances on this one. Benedict Cumberbatch is good as Doctor Strange. He's been good for the entire time, and that's always been the strength of the MCU movies, as getting really good actors to play these roles, which, again, I'm beyond happy with what the MCU does with these decisions. They don't take necessarily the most popular actors. They take what I feel are the best actors that you can. And I don't think I've had an issue with casting at all with an MCU movie. Not that I can think of, really. But I definitely believe that Benedict Cumberbatch is probably the best choice for Doctor Strange. The other performance I want to highlight here, let me get the actress's name, and I'm going to mess this up big time. It's Xochtil Gomez. She played American Chavez. She was good in this, but she didn't have really much to work with in this. American Chavez seemed like an interesting character from what I've watched. I'm not familiar with her character, so it was interesting. I thought she was like an interesting type of character that could have been expanded upon more, but from what they showed, they don't really show much. But the actress, I'm saying this wrong, is Xochtil Gomez. She did a decent job with what she had. I think this is more of a criticism on the writing of the character than of the actress, because I wanted to know a little bit more, but I don't think I was given much other than what her powers are, and that really is it. Like, the only important thing about her was her powers, which is unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, I guess they kind of they really didn't have to do it that way, but I really would have appreciated to have maybe more time to flesh out American Chavez's character. I will say the performance of the movie goes to Elizabeth Olsen as Scarlet Witch, or Wanda Maximoff. I need to think this over a little bit, but I'm comfortable enough saying this. I think this is one of the best villain portrayals in the MCU. I'm looking at, I mean, of course we have Thanos and Loki that you can look at as potentially really good villains. You can, I don't want to count Green Goblin for No Way Home because he's technically not a MCU villain, but Killmonger, I think, is another great MCU villain that can fit on this. I think Elizabeth Olsen as the Scarlet Witch was one of the best that the MCU has brought in this. And there's a good amount of, there's some really good villains that were played very well in these movies. I'm looking through the list right now. Thor Ragnarok had a great villain. Maybe Ego from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 with Kurt Russell. That was pretty good. I was kind of disappointed that they killed off the villain from Shang-Chi, which is the Mandarin. That kind of sucked. But yeah, but Elizabeth Olsen's performance in this movie as the villain was I think the highlight of the film. Whenever she's on screen and whenever her character is doing something, it's easily the most entertaining and the most captivating of the entire film. So I think if you really want to watch a good movie with a great villain, this is definitely a good movie to watch. And I can't recommend that enough on that basis alone. So let me get down to weaknesses and some of the things I just didn't, and I thought needed work on the movie, I would say. Like I mentioned, the plot dragged towards the end of the second act and towards the beginning of the third act. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, it's I would say maybe 20 to 30 minutes where it kind of peters out a little bit, but that's okay. It's fine. It's not a big deal breaker on that end. Well, the other criticism I have are on spoilers, so I will hold a few of those over as well. You know what? I did enjoy the cameos in this, and this will be on spoilers too. But I will say the choices that they made in cameos in the movie, I think were very, very good on that. Again, the strengths when it comes to this film basically is the direction and the performance of Elizabeth Olsen. I think Elizabeth Olsen made this film very good in this. So, and I think if it wasn't for Elizabeth Olsen's performance, it could have been, this could have been an average film. But because her villainous take is so good in this, I can easily recommend this to somebody who I can recommend this to somebody who may not be fully into the MCU, even though to really understand her villainous intent, you kind of need to be caught up with the entire MCU and as to what led her down this path. So right now, I think I'm going to get into spoiler talk. If you haven't watched Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and you are interested in doing that, you can stop here, come back, and you can listen to this segment. I'm going to start this segment for spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When I mentioned spoilers, I mentioned some of the weaknesses in the film, so I think I have to really hammer on those weaknesses since I can talk about it in spoilers. First off, as much as I like Elizabeth Olsen in the movie, and Elizabeth Olsen, this is not a criticism of Elizabeth Olsen. She's great in the movie. My criticism is of the Scarlet Witch and Wanda Maximoff in this. The issue with how they wrote her in this movie is that you needed previous experience with the character throughout the entire MCU to, I think, really grasp as to what issues she's having and why she took this dark turn. You definitely need to watch WandaVision in order to actually appreciate what's going on. I think you have to watch most of the MCU of which she's in it to really get why she turned the way she did. Is it necessary to enjoy? No, but I don't think you're going to enjoy it as much if you don't have that previous experience with Wanda's story as the Scarlet Witch, especially if you have not seen WandaVision. And I know that, and that's the problem with the MCU, I think, in general right now, is that as much as when they started talking about the MCU a decade ago, about what they were planning, I was excited. Don't get me wrong, and I've been happy with what it's been doing. But I also recognize the weaknesses right away. Like, what if this starts going downhill in quality, or the stories aren't as good? But if you're going to keep connecting everything together, you're still going to require people to watch these movies that may or may not be that good. And you can lose people by doing that. And you can also argue that the Multiverse of Madness does an okay job of truncating Scarlet Witch's motivations. But if you're not familiar with what she went through in WandaVision, and specifically what she went through in Age of Ultron and the other Avengers movies, or the other MCU movies, I think you would really have a bit of a hard time connecting with Wanda Maximoff as the Scarlet Witch, which I think makes that performance and makes that character better with that connection that you should have in order to enjoy the performance. So that's an overall problem with the MCU, I think, in that case, because in order to get the maximum amount of power from the maximum amount of power you get from the performance and of what they do in the movie, you need all of that back issues. And I don't think going to Wikipedia and looking at the synopsis is going to help you that much, especially when you start doing call-outs and everything on this. I mentioned in the spoilers as well, cameos. I like the cameos of these movies, especially, we're at spoilers, so be warned. having Reed Richards in the movie, which is played by John Krasinski, which is this as a decent pull. I like that. Seeing Haley Atwell again, this time as Captain Britain, that was cool. But I think when they showed Patrick Stewart as Professor X was why I was like, oh man, that's awesome. But of course, they killed him, so that's great. And I think because of it's a I guess since we're doing a multiverse thing here, that technically these guys are part of a different multiverse than what we may get later on in the eventual X-Men and Fantastic Four movies, which, okay, that's cool to a certain extent, but I would have much rather, if they were going to do that, probably get the principal actors that they were thinking of using in order to actually pull this scene off. I did like seeing Patrick Stewart as Professor X, especially in the yellow motorized, the yellow floating wheelchair. That was awesome. And as someone who was an X-Men fan, I geeked out big time seeing that. And it looked cool too. But a part of me is just like, you're going to waste that. You're going to waste these cameos on something this throwaway. Okay. I mean, it's cool, but it's still kind of disappointing. Another disappointing thing is how the movie, the ending is not disappointing specifically. My issue, and I've talked to a bunch of people about this too, my issue is that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is killing so many great villains that I don't think they're going to have much to work with as time goes on. Like, apparently at the end of the movie, I might be wrong, but apparently at the end of the movie, Wanda's dead. Sorry, spoilers, but we are in spoiler talk. So Wanda dies in this. But if you look at the other MCU movies, like, I mean, Loki is technically dead, but not dead. Thanos is dead. Killmonger, which I think is one of the best villains of the MCU, dead. Red Skull's not technically dead, but he's not coming back anytime soon. Hell is still there. I mean, Ego is dead, I think. But yeah, like a lot of the Mandarin is dead. That's a disappointment. Like some of the best villains, Mysterio is dead. Some of the best villains that the MCU has had with some of the best actors, they just kill off like that. And it leaves me wondering, what exactly are they going to do to build up the next big villain, which apparently is going to be Kang the Conqueror, which I'm not entirely familiar with, but I've heard he's okay. So I'm kind of torn on Kang the Conqueror being, I think, the big villain for the next phase. But this is also another problem with the MCU as well. I mentioned when you have so many things and the quality dips, you're forcing people to watch series and movies that maybe aren't that good, and that could really tune people out. And that's definitely happening with the MCU in the fourth stage. I think they've put out too much content at this point. I'm just finishing up Moon Knight right now, and I'm kind of lukewarm on it. I think the best of the series is probably Loki, and Loki was just okay too. So, and that's what, from each of those, 5 hours worth of content you have to go through, 5.5 hours of content that's just okay at best. That's kind of a lot to ask for somebody, for them to get roped into the universe again and to try and get into the bigger picture of what happens later on down the road in an Avengers style type of movie. So that's a big problem with me. But let me get back into spoilers with the Multiverse of Madness here. I think they need to end the connection with Doctor Strange and Christine, I think, is the name of the character that Rachel McAdams play. I love Rachel McAdams, don't get me wrong, but I think that plot line has to end because it's just not going to go anywhere at this point. And if they try and do something else where they eventually end up falling in love again, it's just not going to feel that, it's not going to feel that satisfying. So I think they should go ahead and just end that plot line at this point. What else can I say? Oh, yeah, let me talk about American Chavez. Again, I think the character is interesting as a blueprint. A teenager who travels multiverses and couldn't control her power, but you could have done a lot with that and made it very interesting. But it just feels like she was a plot device throughout the entire movie, and that was it. They didn't do much with her character. They didn't do much giving her a personality or anything, which hamstrung the actress who played this character, which sucks. But she did a good job in the movie. But I really wish they did a lot more with American Chavez. Maybe they'll give her her own series. Maybe she'll get involved in another movie of some sort, since I guess this is the multiverse saga they are doing with the MCU. So hopefully that's what they do. And yeah, hopefully they flesh that out a little bit more when she's in a new film or in a new TV series. I get the feeling she's going to be in a TV series and not a film, which, yeah, it could be disappointing. But yeah. Okay, let me get into my final thoughts on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Look, I've had a couple of complaints about this movie, but I think this is actually a very good movie. I think it's one of the better MCU movies. Elizabeth Olsen is a fantastic villain in this movie. The action and the way the story builds up and basically goes throughout the movie is very solid. It is very good. I liked the direction that Sam Raimi took it. Gave a different feel to the movie that I think it deserved, because you were doing something very different in this movie than the other MCU movies did. Same thing with the Eternals. They were going through an entirely different thing, so it was directed and shot differently. So I think the Multiverse of Madness deserved that type of shooting when it came to making the film. Weaknesses, of course, second act, the end of the second half to the beginning of the third act is kind of weak. As much as I liked Xochtil, oh my god, I'm so sorry. I think it's Xochtil Gomez. Yeah, Xochtil Gomez. I liked her performance, but the character and writing she was given were not very hot. I mean, they weren't bad, but they could have been a lot better. So I was disappointed by that. I think Doctor Strange, the character itself, is a good character. He's interesting, but they have to make him more dynamic for the third movie if they're doing another movie with him specifically. They gotta give him something more to do in this one. So overall, I think this is a very good MCU movie. If I had to give it a rating on my Letterboxd at Capital Games Wiz, I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, which I think is a decent rating. That's a 7. That's a 7 out of 10. That's pretty damn good. And I think if you've stepped away from the MCU and you just want to watch a good MCU movie, if you're in the mood, this is a good one. And this is one that does enough different to make it feel unique in a specific way, especially with the way it's shot and with what they do in the movie. I do look forward to seeing what they do with Doctor Strange in his story next. So hopefully Sam Raimi comes back with that one, or they give somebody else a crack at it who has a different visual motif that they can use to make that more exciting. Normally, I would have, if Zero were here, I would have a question for him. But since I already talked about what my favorite movies from the MCU are, I think I've kind of answered that question to a certain extent. So we'll skip the question, and I will go into what we're going to watch next week. Basically, I'm going to watch another MCU movie. It's the other MCU movie I haven't seen two MCU movies, and that is The Incredible Hulk, which I realize I've never seen. I don't think I'm ever going to see it, to be completely honest with you, but maybe I will at one point. But next week's movie is going to be Thor: Love and Thunder. It's directed by Taika Waititi, and it is starring Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, and Christian Bale. This was released early in the year in the theaters. It got decent reviews. Word of mouth is okay. So I'm gonna, and I actually really liked Thor Ragnarok and the direction it took. So I'm going to look forward to watching that next week with you. If you have suggestions to what I can watch next, maybe if you want to peruse my watch list on Letterboxd, or hey, maybe if you have a movie you think I should watch, if you want to hear my opinion of, you can email us at zerowizcast@gmail.com, or you can just comment on the video below or on my Twitter, wherever you find the post that the podcast is up, and you can make a suggestion, and I'll see if I will watch it. So on that note, that will be the end of the Capital Games Movie Club for this week. Tune in next week where I watch Thor: Love and Thunder, directed by Taika Waititi. I am The Wiz. I will talk to you next week.